Please rewind this cassette.
I'm about to drop this review, motherfuckers, for The Boys Season 1, presented to you from Amazon Prime, who I guess is now throwing their hand into the ring with networks like HBO or going against Netflix with things like Stranger Things. This is event television. I think this is the first real breakout hit that Amazon's ever had. They've had critically acclaimed shows in the past, and they've had shows that won awards and so on, but this is a pop culture hit right out of the gate. I mean, everyone's been talking about this show for the last few weeks. I watched it, God, I guess now it's been like 2 or 3 weeks ago that I first watched it. So I'm kind of on the bandwagon with this. It's really hard to talk about this because I feel like I'm at risk of saying a lot of things that have already been said by other reviewers, especially other YouTubers who have been praising this show. And I'm assuming eventually there'll be a turn of the tide where people start getting more negative about the show, especially comic book purists who are just going to attack it as an unfaithful adaptation, even though this is one of the most faithful adaptations of a comic book I've ever seen. And I'll go into that further in that I think in many ways this is a superior version of the story to the comic book. I know, I love Garth Ennis, what's wrong with you? He did Preacher. Yeah, I agree, Preacher's a fucking masterpiece. I'm totally with all of you guys, and most of the stuff he's done is good. The Boys is not one of his great works, in my opinion. It's gonna out-Preacher. Yeah, I guess it did in the terms of, like, if you're just a masochist and you like that kind of tone, but he forgot that Preacher actually had a great plot and characters. I'm not the world's biggest fan of the original comic book, and I read it years ago. I read it back in like 2009. I probably read it 10 years ago, and I was very disappointed. I especially think it loses momentum halfway through. And I would say that a big plus with this show is that they fleshed out the Seven much more. They've added a lot more humanity to the show that was in the comic. And in general, I think all the changes they made have only been for the benefit of it in a television format. And in particular, I think Huey is so much better in the show than he is in the comic that it really gives the show a heart that I think was missing as a central part of... Because really the comic, it's Billy Butcher's story. And I think the fans are going to be the most divided on how they've handled Billy's character in the show. And don't be wrong, everyone loves to see Carl Urban hamming up and chewing the scenery, but I think a lot of people are going to be disappointed in some of the things they've changed with this character. But in my opinion, A-Train much better, The Deep much better. Homelander is far superior in the show to me than he was in the comic. Even if they've kept a lot of the similar events, I think they've made Homelander much more nuanced and interesting. But that's a different conversation. I know some comic book purists are going to be down in the comments telling me that I'm an idiot and I don't understand the brilliance of the original comic, but I'm not with you guys on that. Also, the TV show has the benefit of being a parody of Zack Snyder's DCEU films. It's clearly making fun of those aesthetics and that style and what Zack Snyder was trying to do with Superman and Batman v Superman. And they're also able to make fun of the MCU and comment on the world we live in today with superheroes being such a part of our media landscape in a way that they never were before. And when the comic originally came out, what did we have? Like Spider-Man 2, Batman Begins? The commentary was more about comic books. And I always said the biggest flaw with the Watchmen film that Zack Snyder made was that he tried to make a comic book movie that was a deconstruction and commentary on comic books. But most general audiences don't read comic books, and Watchmen as a book worked as that. But the movie itself should have been a deconstruction of superhero movies, but at the time there wasn't as many superhero movies. You could definitely make an argument that Watchmen came out too soon and would have much more impact today than it would have when it came out, 10 years ago? It might even been longer than that. Watchmen was a long time ago. I think it was 2009. And now we have the Watchmen series coming out on HBO, and I don't even know if it's necessary anymore. I think the show did everything that I would have hoped that a Watchmen show would do. There's one sequence in particular where Homelander is giving a speech to a crowd of people, and he floats through the crowd, and you see him on the television, and it looks like a comic book panel, and it has such Watchmen vibes to it. Like, this gave me such Watchmen vibes throughout the whole thing, and just made me hate Zack Snyder's vision even more. The DC fans who defend his storytelling and what he's doing in those DCU films, they just, I mean, I don't know, you could say anything anymore. Because the guy's a fucking idiot. I'm just going to, anyway, Zack Snyder's a fucking idiot. What Eric Kripke has done here, the showrunner of Supernatural, and to a lesser extent what Seth Rogen and Evan Goldberg have done here, is really just show that you could do something that Snyder is attempting to do with a more adult superhero film, one that's reflecting the world we live in, one that's breaking down these characters, one that subverts your expectations, but you can do so with wit, you can do so with really good acting, with charm, and you can also make that sexual content or violence work within the context of the story instead of it not really making sense. Also, you can have world building. The pilot to the season is phenomenal, directed by Dan Trachtenberg, who I think is just great at this point. I mean, this guy did 10 Cloverfield Lane. He did that Portal short. He directed an episode of Black Mirror. But his work on the pilot, which is arguably the best episode of the whole season, is just a great piece of world building. Originally, Evan Goldberg and Seth Rogen were going to direct it, and I was really worried about that because I hated how they adapted Preacher. Not a fan of the Preacher show. And I also don't think they're very good directors in general. I think they're good writers. I mean, I'm a fan of Superbad and all that. But thank God they brought in Dan Trachtenberg. And then episode 2, Matt Shackman from It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. Fuck yes. Fuck yes, indeed. So let's just go into what makes The Boys so fucking great is that it has balls. This is a show with balls that actually has, hey, my name's Starlight. I want to join the Seven. I want to join the Justice League. And then some guy's like, okay, but suck my dick. Which they changed in the show to the Deep, which I think is for the better. And she actually does it. She actually sucks his dick. And then we get into this Weinstein Me Too commentary. And it's kind of her overcoming that and struggling with that she actually is a superhero with integrity and wanting to save people when all of these other superheroes are just corporate sellouts. The villain of the story is corporate America. And in many ways, this is an attack on Disney. And what Marvel has done to the cinema landscape and Disney in general, which I was not expecting. This is very risky stuff to be attacking the mouse. Although more so, this is probably an attack on WB and how they handled those characters. So the story's main protagonist, I would argue, is Starlight, who has just joined the Seven, and then Huey, who works at an electronics store, and his girlfriend is brutally killed by the Flash, A-Train, who I also think is handled much better in the show. She just fucking explodes in the first episode into like just a pool of fucking blood, and it's like, and that's in the comic, but it's like, holy shit, it's very visceral. And so Carl Urban shows up as Billy Butcher, and he's like, hey, listen, I'm a guy who takes these fuckers out. I get superheroes who get away with collateral damage. And they're all assholes, and I want to bring them down. And he clearly has some kind of bias in that. So while Huey's joining the Boys and taking on superheroes, we follow Starlight's journey through the Seven and this corporation, which is really the villain of the story, run by Elizabeth Shue, who is fucking amazing in this. Elizabeth Shue is just shooing it the fuck up. She is sensual, very intelligent. It's a smart performance. The way that she plays off the Homelander character, it's just great. What I really wasn't expecting, though, was good story structure and pacing and a consistent tone and plotting that actually really works, and editing and transition. I mean, everything about this works. I have to give a lot of credit to Eric Kripke, because I think that experience he had from doing Supernatural really translated to this working as a television show. I think he knew how to do a television show. In particular, I think he knew how to pace out 8 episodes. So it was just fucking awesome to watch a show that was pulling you in with its graphic content and swearing and sexuality and things we haven't really seen in a superhero property outside of the Watchmen film. And Kick-Ass. This is basically Kick-Ass with a big budget. That's reminding me a lot of, like, oh, this is like Kick-Ass if it got $100 million. But it draws you into the fact that in its best moments, when these shocking moments happen, and I won't try to spoil too much, but when people die in this show, when things happen, it reminded me of Game of Thrones. I think it's Game of Thrones at its best, the early seasons, where you don't really feel safe for anybody because these characters have superpowers and they're sort of out of touch with reality. It creates a tension in scenes that wouldn't have tension otherwise, where you have a human character interacting with one of the superheroes. And because the superhero could kill them so easily, it makes things so fucking scary. I mean, Homelander, there's scenes with him where I didn't know what he was going to do. There's an airplane sequence in episode 4 that has direct parallels to 9/11. And you think about how Zack Snyder did the destruction of Metropolis, and then you think about how they handle this plane sequence, and it's just so far superior. And it's a moral question, and honestly, his logic with it and where he comes to, without spoiling anything, is like, yeah, that makes sense, dude. I kind of get where you're coming from. Totally fucked up sequence, though. Really hard to watch, but at the same time captivating, and is a catapult for even more events and getting deeper into the psychology of the Homelander character. So, Homelander steals the show for me. I mean, just straight up. Anthony Starr, who I kind of knew from Banshee, where the fuck has this guy been hiding? Why has Hollywood kept this guy on, like, the B list? This dude has mad chops. He has, like, 4 different facial expressions. This is a brilliant performance, and I don't say that lightly. This deserves Emmy consideration. He's terrific, and Homelander's one of the best villains we've gotten in a long time. At first, you're like, okay, he's just Superman and Captain America in this universe. Then you start to realize, is this guy crazy? And then you get his backstory, and you find out so much more about him. And then by the end of the season, this guy's like just acting on such a high level, in particular in the finale. He's just elevating the material every time. He looks perfect in the role, which would be one thing, because the role's really built in the aesthetics. A lot of the show is built in the aesthetics, but his performance is just so nuanced and calculated and well thought out, well performed. I mean, it's really a great performance. He's the standout. As much as I love Jack Quaid as Huey, and I think he's awesome and likable and compelling, and Carl Urban's always fun to watch, and, you know, the guy who plays Frenchie does a terrific job. By the way, Frenchie, great character. This guy, Anthony Starr, is Homelander. I mean, he's what's going to bring everybody back to season 2, 3, 4, 5, what have you. He's so compelling. Every scene with Homelander hits. There isn't a scene that doesn't work. Like, there's a terrific sequence with him and the Wonder Woman of this universe, Queen Maeve, where they have to go stop the shooter. And the way the scene's just staged and how the two of them are hanging out and plays out, it just shows you what the Justice League movie could have been. And a lot of it, you know, hinges on his performance. It's great to have a villain that's unpredictable, and it's great to have a villain that's smarter than what you think he is, but also has this fucked up trauma, and he has mommy issues, and he doesn't really feel like he belongs. And it's just compelling. It's just compelling to watch this guy as this character in the show, and I want to see more of him. I'm just completely in love with the character of Homelander. Like I said, I love Huey. Huey is so good in the show immediately. In the pilot, you could tell they really put some money behind it. There's a terrific fight sequence with who's basically
that ain't the invisible cunt.
Where they actually use those special effects while they're having a ball in an electronics store that just looks fucking awesome and is very, very well done. So kudos to the special effects team, kudos to the set design, the costume design. All of it's on point. It's self-aware without being too comedic. It still feels somewhat believable, and it adds to the commentary of what's going on. Because a lot of things that are in the comic, there's so much sexual content in the comic book. I mean, there's orgies all over the place. Seeing it only a couple times in the show, it's like, I get the point. I don't need more of this. And also, to me, the superhero characters, the 7, came off as less psychopaths in this than they did in the comic. It's not that I have a problem with sexual content or violence. I'm all for it. I just think that having a little bit of restraint goes a long way, so that when you do have big moments, one in particular where a guy gets his face, not just his face, his whole head fucking explodes from a girl laying on top of his face. It's like, it's hardcore shit, but that has more impact because they don't overdo it. So when a moment like that happens, it's more visceral and more impactful because of it. And the show's just consistently clever with that stuff, and it has good dialogue. There's a Spice Girls speech that Billy gives that's just fucking fantastic. Just really hits home. It's funny, and then it cuts to the Deep, who has this running joke throughout the show, because this guy's a piece of shit, Aquaman. Aquaman's a piece of shit, and is played by Chase Crawford. But he has this thing where he wants to save, you know, sea creatures. He wants to save dolphins. He tries to save this lobster, and it always blows up in his face. It always ends very tragically. And it's one of the best running gags, and I hope they keep it going, where he's trying to be a better person and do the right thing, but it's like the universe won't let it be. It won't let it happen. And man, he has a scene that happens to him later on that just is so fucked up and weird, and something I've never really seen done before in any kind of movie or TV show that was so interesting, and just added more of a grayness to the morality of what's going on in this show. But The Deep is awesome. The Deep is fucking great. The fact that this guy could start off as such a piece of shit but with charisma and then become a sympathetic character by the end of this first season in 8 episodes really just shows you how strong this material was. Because originally this was going to go to Cinemax, and there was even talks about a movie, and then Cinemax canned it before Amazon picked it up. And I'm betting you money that HBO and Netflix are regretting not getting this show, because this is going to be a huge hit. I expect to start seeing t-shirts of Homelander and other characters in the coming years. I think, really, we needed this. This was a refresher, you know, where we're at with superhero films, and they're always talking about the fatigue that's going to set in. We really needed something like this to remind us why we like these kind of stories to begin with. Which is what's beautiful. But the Deep, really, he's a great example of a character of why the show works, where there's layers to everything that's going on, and they keep surprising you. Same with A-Train. He kills Huey's girlfriend. You kind of hate the guy. He seems like a cocky asshole. Then you find out about his mother and his brother, and that he's a drug addict and what he's going through. And not only is he the fastest man alive, but he has to maintain that to keep a level of success, and how people view him and how the media views him and the public. And it just makes him more interesting. And then by the end of the first season, you don't hate him either. You don't really hate anybody. As evil as Homelander can be, he never really does anything that bad. He never really does anything that doesn't have a reasoning behind it. And a lot of the people that he kills, I think he's justified in his own way of why he chooses to do that. But especially that tension between him and Elizabeth Shue throughout the show is enticing and exciting. Which is just great. So yeah, Elizabeth Shue's great. All the cast is great. There's religious commentary in here. A lot of, atheist. There's a bit of an atheist bent here, which is totally Garthiness, and I had no problem with it. It was very fun, especially a scene with Billy Butcher.
His big old answer to the existential clusterfuck that is humanity is to nail his own bleeding son to a plank. That is a cunt move.
There's hypocrisy is front and center here. How people present themselves as one way, but behind the scenes, really, people aren't that way at all. There's a lot of humanity here. There's a lot of loyalty and friendship, and there's these meet-cute scenes between Huey and Starlight that I didn't think would work so well, and they totally work. They're completely charming. There's a bowling scene that's just terrific, and it kind of has Buffy vibes to me. And they even do the Zack Snyder slow-mo in the season finale, and it just totally works again. Just loved the pacing, loved the soundtrack. The music choices are awesome, although maybe it seems a little derivative of Guardians of the Galaxy at points. Translucent early on, just the guy's compelling.
Unless we kill thousands.
It's a great idea. Like, if you locked a superhero up in a cage, how would you kill him? He's invincible. How do you kill people that are invincible? It really keeps the stakes high, because the superheroes are so much more powerful than the human characters. Now, in the comic, they found a way to deal with this with Compound V, but in the show, I don't know if they're going to go down that route, and I think the show might be better to avoid the Compound V in the way that it was used in the comics. The Compound V is still in the first season, but I won't spoil it, but there's something that characters do with the Compound V in the comic that kind of equals things out, and I don't know if they should do that, because having these guys who don't have superpowers having to try to overcome this corporation and the Seven, I think that's the whole hook of the show, is how are they going to do this? And that's what creates a lot of the tension, sustained tension, that's throughout the whole show. I mean, I was tense in so many scenes throughout the show. That airplane sequence, the pilot. The show's just also fucking funny. It's things that I don't even know if they were meant to be comedic are funny. The dialogue just pops. The character interactions. There's slapstick comedy. There's interactions that are just funny because of the context. There's dynamics that change on you, because the cool thing is you're watching Homelander become a villain throughout the story. At the beginning, he's not really at that place, and then throughout it, you slowly see him sort of take control of the Seven and start to get to that point where he wants to overthrow his masters, if you will. And watching him kind of rise up while Billy Butcher seems to, at the beginning, seems to be really compelling and have his shit together, you find out throughout more of the season that he's more broken and fallen apart. Now, Billy's motivations for why he wants revenge on these guys, in particular one character, they've changed it a bit from the comic book. And I don't know how some people are going to feel about that, but I would argue that the finale does something so interesting that it kind of justifies itself and why they made those changes. Also, I want to point out the YouTuber Nitpicks, who I am a big fan of, by the way. I'm a huge fan in particular of his Ben Affleck video that he made, which is an amazing video. His 13 Reasons Why video is terrific. It's very similar to a video idea I had in my head. I'm a fan of the guy, but I think recently he made his worst video by far when talking about the show. He has a whole video where he criticizes this show and says that it cheated us, or that it did us wrong. I can't remember specifically what the title was. And his whole argument for that was that the season ends on a cliffhanger and that everything wasn't wrapped up neatly, so that if the second season comes out and is bad, that's going to ruin the show for him. I don't get this criticism, and I think he points out some nitpicks to try to justify his argument. It's a pretty poorly argued video, and there's a lot of negative comments because of it, because television in general has had cliffhangers. This is a norm of television. I know with certain shows now, like Stranger Things, or these miniseries type show like American Horror Story or True Detective, people have gotten a little bit more accustomed to seasons being wrapped up. But in general, television's always had cliffhangers, and there's nothing wrong with cliffhangers. That's pretty normal with comic books too. This is a 72-issue comic. So ending on a story arc and then it not having everything wrapped up, the main storyline, makes sense. I'd also argue that they do resolve things in this first season with the Elizabeth Shue character and the A-Train storyline that I think was this story's season, and with Homelander's character. And because how they end this season on that cliffhanger, that opens up a new storyline for season 2. So I really don't know what the fuck he was talking about. And once again, I'm not a hater of nitpicks. I like his channel. But to me, it felt like he just didn't like the finale on a personal level. So he made a video to attack the show because everyone else is loving it. And he had to find some way to justify his criticism. And it didn't work. He should have just done a review of the finale and why he didn't like it from a writing standpoint, instead of saying, essentially, I didn't like that the show ended on a cliffhanger. And a big part of his argument is that if the second season sucks, that ruins the show. And he brings up the show Killing Eve as an example. I just don't agree with this. I'm like, well, people didn't used to have a problem with Game of Thrones ending on cliffhangers. And people are like, what do you mean? Everyone bitched about the finale. I'm like, the series finale, nobody complained when every season ended on a cliffhanger for several years for the most part. I mean, so I just don't understand his point of view on this. I get that in modern television, we have cliffhangers less and less as time goes on, but I thought the finale worked perfectly fine, and I think that cliffhanger's fucking awesome. It's as good as Sylvester Stallone's cliffhanger. I mean, really, because what it sets up is it makes Homelander even more of a villain, because what he does in this way of letting someone live just to let them suffer and fuck with their head is so evil and so much more fucked up. And where they end on this, I think, is also the secret to how they're going to beat Homelander down the road. I think they introduced the only character who could defeat Homelander in the future season. So, if anything, to me, it just made the show more interesting, it expanded the world, and it makes me excited for season 2. I don't really see how you can criticize it in that way unless you just don't like cliffhangers and you don't like what they did with Billy, which is fine if you didn't like how they adapted Billy. But just to say that you don't like that it wraps up its own storyline, it's like, well, dude, this is a show that's going to run for several seasons. I mean, they've already covered a lot of the comic, but there's still a lot of the comic left. And they already had season 2 greenlit when they were making season 1. So they knew they were going to get a second season. They're filming season 2 right now. You know, praising the performances and the satire and the comedy and the deconstruction and the heroes and the villains, and how this made me really enjoy superheroes in a way that I hadn't in a long time. And it made me think about things like if Superman existed, he'd be fucking scary. I mean, he has goddamn laser eyes and you can't kill him. He's a god. And what would God do if he was here and he could abuse that power? I mean, this is Old Testament God. This is none of that New Testament pussy bullshit. They also use the laser eyes perfectly here. I'm like that they didn't lean on the flying and other things that Superman does. They lean on the laser eyes. There's a scene where he goes and kills a bunch of terrorists. That's so badass where you just see the eyes in shadows. Fucking loved it. Loved all the actions. But going back to some characters, Frenchie. At first, Frenchie just comes off like a stereotype character you've seen in a lot of shows. And then he becomes more believable and interesting and gets the job done. I didn't love every character. I think the boys totally weren't fleshed out. I know the show probably could have focused on them a little bit more, and I get that. But Huey's just so good, and this actor's so good that it just makes up for anything. I also like that Simon Pegg plays the dad, and they based the original character, the design of the Huey character, off Simon Pegg, and he probably would have played the character years ago. There's just a punk rock spirit to this. You know, if you're a fan of Matthew Vaughn, if you're a fan of Edgar Wright, if you're a fan of Quentin Tarantino, if you're a fan of that sort of stuff, I don't see how this isn't up your alley. This is a superhero show for people who don't love superhero shows. This honestly shot Daredevil down for me, and I thought Daredevil was like the gold standard. I was like, well, no one's ever going to make a better superhero show than Daredevil, and a lot of that had to do with the fight scenes and Charlie Cox's performance. Now that I've seen this, I'm like, all right, Daredevil's way down, and then stuff like Luke Cage and that just like can fuck off at this point. Because this is just so much better. This is better than most superhero movies that have come out, and this is so much better than any other superhero television show. And maybe it's because we had to wait for somebody to actually put money into a superhero show too, but this takes it to a whole nother level. It takes it to another level psychologically, and it takes it to another level in that the story feels bigger and the stakes feel higher than they do in a lot of superhero movies. You actually feel like people are going to die in this show. You actually feel like there's consequences for actions, which I don't think you feel like in a lot of superhero movies. I think there's usually so much levity in a Marvel film, and there's exceptions, but for the most part, you feel like the characters are going to come out okay in the end. I didn't feel that way watching this show. I didn't really know who was going to come out ahead at the end, and I didn't really know. I mean, I knew from the comic book, but they changed enough. Also, Black Noir, Batman, basically,
Children
he doesn't
just
do
like to see
anything,
who
which is
needs your
perfect.
help.
He just sits around and doesn't do anything the whole show. There's a great part where Homelander's like, you've all been lazy and off your game, except you, Guy, except you, Black Noir. You've been awesome. All the meetings with the Seven are fantastic. They're really exciting sequences. I'm trying to think if I miss anything before I wrap this up, because, like I said, I am saying a lot of things that other people have said, but it's hard not to say it. It's hard not to gush over the show. It really is an achievement. I would say that the second half of the season isn't as good as the first half. I think the first half's just a little bit better written and more clever and paced a little better. I do think the show gets a little sloppy in its second half. But at the same time, having said that, what they're getting so right on this show consistently stays good throughout the whole thing. And I was just binging the fuck out of this thing. It was hard for me not to watch all episodes in a row. I tried to space it out like 3 episodes, you know, and then 2, but it was very tough. I was addicted to the show. I've already told a dozen of my friends to watch it. They all watched it. They all loved it, including Blood Money. And he was originally going to do this review with me, but we might do something together down the road. We might do a spoiler review for the show and talk about specific details and scenes, because really the show would be more interesting to talk about in a spoiler discussion. But for me, Homelander stole the show. Eric Kripke did a phenomenal job with this. I think a lot of his abilities that he showed was Supernatural, which is a show I like. This feels like a hard R version of a CW show, which might sound like a negative, but I don't think it is. I actually think it really works because of that, because it's kind of making fun of CW shows at the same time. And just the way that these characters have, I mean, we really haven't ever got a good Flash movie. This is the best the Flash has ever been in a movie. I preferred their version of Wonder Woman. It's just all that sort of thing, and just making an evil Superman, a scary Superman, a villain of a story, and getting it right. And it's been hinted at other comic books, like Superman Red Son, like if he grew up in Russia instead of the United States. But most of those comics or storylines ultimately still go back to Superman being a good guy. Homelander, we don't really know who this guy is yet. We don't really know how good or bad he is. He seems like a crazy motherfucker, but I don't think it's that cut and dry. I loved Carl Urban in this. I love seeing him. I don't know what the fuck accent he was doing. All I kept hearing was New Zealand, but it seemed like he was trying to do a British accent. I don't know what the fuck that accent is. It was all over the place, but goddamn if Carl Urban isn't awesome. He was so entertaining to watch in this. And I think he has a scene with Homelander and Elizabeth Shue's character at the end of this show that is just so fucking well acted and well done and tense. I mean, there's a part with a baby where I was like, I don't know what the fuck's gonna happen to this baby. And it really had me freaked out. Like big time. So yeah, a scary Superman, a great idea. An Aquaman who gets mocked for being Aquaman, that he's not the main guy of the team because he just talks to fish, but that there's something really compelling about him in his patheticness. That Starlight totally works, and that she is a superhero in a world where these people forgot why they're doing what they're doing. And she shows the because I saw a lot of critics gave the show negative reviews. It wasn't totally critically acclaimed. Audiences are loving it, but a lot of critics just said that it revels in nihilism, that it's a cynical show and just completely nihilistic. And I don't agree with that. I don't think it's a nihilistic piece. And I don't think Garth Ennis' writing is nihilistic in a sense. And I think people miss the point. There is a lot of negativity in the show, and there's a lot of stuff that's hard to watch. And there's a lot of stuff that makes you kind of sick in your stomach. But at the same time, the show keeps showing these glimpses of optimism with the Starlight character and with the future of where things are going to go. And I think the show is going to end on a more positive note. I think we have to be in the dumps right now with everybody getting shit on. It's like the Starks getting killed off in the first few seasons of Game of Thrones. And then it'll turn around and things will start happening for the good guys, whoever the good guys are. You can't really call Billy Butcher a good guy. So that's kind of where we're heading. Like, nobody really knows who the final villain's going to be. Now, I know who it is in the comic, but I don't know if they're going to stick with that in the show either. Just call me a fanboy if you want. Say that I'm a blind fanboy to this. I love The Boys. I love every fucking thing about it. I think it's goddamn fantastic. From a casting, writing, production values, all of it. And the fact that it is a dark show that's willing to go to dark places, which makes it more than what it would be in a typical genre like this in a science fiction or fantasy universe. Just the way Game of Thrones went to deeper places in its early seasons. It's exciting. It's exciting to have a new show. I haven't liked a pilot this much in years. The way that Huey seems like a guy who wouldn't be able to do these things, and then he uses his intelligence and sometimes just sheer bravery to do something that no one expects him to do. And it's exciting to watch him reach that level to get to a higher place and find out a way to overcome these things. I mean, there's a part where he has to blackmail somebody. There's a part where he has to kill somebody. There's all sorts of things like that, that seeing Huey rise to the occasion is so good. And then also him getting traumatized by the death of his girlfriend and decisions he's made, and seeing how he changes where he's at by the end of the show to kind of find this redemption through that. Because I also read some critics that said this didn't have the character development of the comic book, and I don't really understand that, because there's a lot of character development for every character over 8 episodes. I feel like I know these people so well, in particular Huey, who really has a great arc. Everybody has an arc. Everybody on the show has an arc this season, which is what you want from a television show. And everybody starts off one way and is kind of a different person by the end of the season. And you think about them differently, which is kind of what it's like in real life when you get to know people. People are complex. They're not what they seem like on the surface level. A lot of episodes end with a lot of kinetic energy. The whole fucking show's got a lot of kinetic energy. And it's just the best things about comic book or serialized storytelling in general, translated beautifully to the format of television. And it also shows that streaming really does have a place in society and where it's going, that, you know, I preferred watching this all at once instead of watching it week by week. It was exciting to watch, to know that it was still there and that I was going to be able to finish the show. And I know Netflix already proved this, but now that Amazon's also doing things like this, it just kind of levels the playing field and makes it exciting that anything could get made now. Anything could get made from all of these different conglomerates trying to make their shows and get their name out there in this universe of streaming, especially with Disney Plus coming out. So kudos to everyone who worked on this. Kudos to Amazon for making this. And yeah, I have nothing but praise for it. Minor issues here and there. I think there's certain flaws, but overall they really achieved this. this kind of perfect balance of tone and a sense of excitement and fear and real fear and scary situations that I just want more of. I'm sort of addicted to this. This is edgy McEdge here. This is the edgiest, like, 15-year-old boy wants to make a TV show.
Jesus,
and the comic was designed to be that way. This is some edgy shit, and it's self-aware about being edgy, and it's comedic in that way, especially in the pilot, the way the pilot ends. It's like, this is so funny. I just love how edgy it is. Once again, I know some of the negative reviews are, this is a show just made for boys. It's exploitive of women. It's just made for teenage boys to whack off to. This is just a boy's fantasy. And I would argue, what's so wrong with that? Why can't there be a show that is exploitive and sort of a teenage boy's fantasy and ridiculous in that sense, that it's so over the top? Why can't we have shows like that? Why can't we have content like that? And why can't we enjoy stuff like that? That doesn't... Why are you trying to make some kind of moral argument for entertainment? I think that's pretty ridiculous. I think that, if anything, we need content like this just to, remind us that we all have that part of ourselves that is fucked up, that we all are capable of bad things, and that we overcome them or choose not to act on those things. And The Boys ultimately is about that, not acting on your impulses, not acting on the negative parts of your personality, and trying your hardest to see things from another person's point of view, to actually have empathy and understanding and accept that bad things happen and you're not always in control of them. And it's not the universe, it's not God giving you the middle finger, that you have to take action and you have to accept the mistakes that you've made. And I couldn't be more excited. So I give season 1 of The Boys a solid 9 out of 10. It was great. And even if season 2 sucks, like Nitpick said, I don't think that's going to hurt this first season at all. I'll still go back and watch this season all the time, just for certain sequences and episodes that stand out. I'd say episode 1 and 4 really stand out, but in general, there isn't a bad episode. There isn't a lesser episode. And the finale is probably the weakest episode of the season, and it's still good. But it's overall, this was just a real surprise. This kind of came out of nowhere. And now everybody's in love with it, and it sort of took over. And I'm so happy to be excited about a TV show again, with how disappointing Stranger Things 3 was, and the final season of Game of Thrones being a fucking awful piece of garbage.
And he kind of forgot about the Iron Fleet.
It's so nice to have this show that's new and doing so many things right. That just makes me, so happy, being like, okay, I can enjoy something again. I'm not jaded. I don't just hate everything. I can still enjoy stuff, and I can still be excited about things. That was a very nice feeling to have, and maybe that makes me a little bit more positive on the show than I should be. But god damn it, man. I've been getting kicked for a long time. I've been being put down for the last few years with movies and TV shows, so... Thank you to Seth Rogen, Evan Goldberg, and Eric Kripke for doing the show and reminding me why I fell in love with this stuff to begin with, and reminding me that I do love superheroes, I do love comic books, and in general, I just love this type of storytelling, and it's nice to have that back. So thank you to everyone who worked on the show, and yeah. Bring on season 2. Release it quick. I don't want to wait. I want to see this shit in 6 months because I am addicted. So tell me what you think in the comment section. Do you agree with Nitpick's video? Do you agree with me? Are you somewhere in the middle? Do you think the show is nihilistic? Do you think it's a bad adaptation? Let's not fight. Let's actually have a discussion about this, because I think there's a lot of food for thought here. And yeah, just tell me what you think down there. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.